Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, that's how we start this show. You are listening to a Radulich Broadcasting premiere podcast. Damn you, Hollywood! And here's your host, Robert Winfree. Yay!
Yeah, that's about as animated and enthusiastic as either of us are going to get on this particular episode tonight, ladies and gentlemen, because Mark and I are discussing Paranormal Activity: Next of Kin.
Yeah, we are.
You see, Next of Kin because they're sending out notifications to all the adjacent franchises that this one has died.
Hey, if you're
Oof.
catching us on the live stream while we are recording this and airing it to the world, if you have comments, if you have suggestions, insults, pies in the face, anything you like, throw it up in the comments section. And if it amuses me, I will put it on screen and we will interact with you. Because God knows I need the distraction from this stupid movie.
Yeah.
You know what kills me about this?
Yeah.
I was like excited for when Blumhouse announced that the film was locked and they didn't need to wait until I think it was like the end of February, beginning of March, whenever it was the slate to come out the same weekend as the new Batman movie, which I believe was the beginning of March.
Yeah,
This thing would have gotten murderized.
That's certainly a choice that they could have made.
So, but I think initially when this was conceived, it was going to go to the screen, and then they were like, "No, we need content for Paramount Plus." So they're like, "Okay, so this is going to be
because they would need to be one level above Peacock, which I still maintain is not a legitimate streaming service.
So they had to. So they transitioned to this was going to be a Paramount Plus exclusive, but it was still coming out the same weekend as Batman. And then they were like, "Well, the film is actually locked; it's done now." So we can actually release it before Halloween. And I like, and you know me, I'm a bit of a planner. So I'm like struggling. I'm really excited about this. I'm really excited about this because it gave us the opportunity to release all of our old, and we did like 3 shows on this franchise between the 5 films and Gem and the Holograms.
Between 2 Long Road to Ruin installments.
Right.
For the first 4. And then, our reviews of the other 2 movies, I think. Yeah.
No, we never did. We never did the one with the I think the Mexican kids.
And I know we didn't do that one.
We only did the Ghost Dimension.
Okay.
But
I will believe you.
You went to review the Ghost Dimension, and I reviewed Gem and the Holograms. It was hilarious. I actually went back and listened to that again.
I remember that. I remember that most vividly because at that time, Paramount was in a dispute with every major theater chain in the country, basically.
Which you talked about on the show about the distribution, and I think I think they were very cognizant of that with this one. In any case, so they yes. Okay, get your mother. I'm clearly in the middle of something. So, anyway, so they, my daughter damn threw off my train of thought. Anyway, so I was very excited to release all of our old Paranormal Activity stuff, and I was somewhat interested in the movie. I wish it had been a lot better than this.
You should never. No one should ever wish for a movie to be this bad.
No,
with very few exceptions. The exceptions being this franchise has run its course.
Yeah.
And we now wish for it to die and go away. Because
that was my major takeaway from this film watching experience is that I think they have wrung all the juice out of Paranormal Activity they possibly can. This needs to either go away for a long while and then come back as a completely new, reboot of the Katie and her sister saga, like just kind of redo the original movies more coherently. If you're going to do it again, or never do this again, those are your choices. What they should not do is what they did with this one, which is try to add to the franchise in some haphazard cockamamie way.
Completely agreed. Here's the other problem with this franchise, and I think there's not really any getting around this.
Mm-hmm.
This would have been so much better as an anthology franchise.
Okay.
Right? Like they spent the first 4 movies trying to connect them back to this same, like haphazardly building this ramshackle monstrosity Tower of Cards with the most tenuous of narrative threads, trying to connect everything. Realistically, if you wanted to continue this, I think the best way to go about it is to have nothing. One of the things I think this movie does right, one of the very few things, most of it is completely divorced from all the previous entries as far as narrative.
Yeah.
Then they try to tie it back in, and everyone wants to shoot themselves in the head. But I really think that, like, by the time we get to Paranormal Activity 3, we don't need a prequel.
Right.
I yelled about this when we talked about that movie. If you want to do another found footage style horror movie that uses the same kind of aesthetic and setups for scares, that's great. That's one of the things I love about the first 2 movies in this franchise. They're great at actually building tension.
This is what we did talk about. This we talked about, like, why not do Paranormal Activity in a jail or a prison?
I still don't know why they haven't done one of these things in a prison. You have a built-in excuse for security cameras,
right? That's what we were talking about. Like, here's the thing: the found footage thing needs to be more organic. There needs to be a good reason all of this is being captured on film, not your stupid boyfriend filming your temper tantrums and then never puts the camera down ever, never. Like that we're done with. So let's do a haunted building with security cameras. Let's do a haunted neighborhood. That has everyone. Everyone has like a ring or something. That was the one thing we liked about Paranormal Activity 4 was the use of the Xbox Kinect.
Yeah, that was pretty good. It was a pretty cool thing they did. I liked the way they adapted from 1 to 2. 1 was a sort of video file trying to document weirdness, which makes sense. You can only do that so often. And how the first one managed to avoid the pitfall that all these other films have had some moron lug the camera around for the finale.
Right.
The first one had the common sense to have the camera on a tripod. It gets knocked over.
Right.
But everything else happens off screen because that's what would happen, and it's actually more effective than what they've done.
I think the second one was all the house security footage, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was great. Which works. Like, logical next step, house gets burglarized, we install security cameras, and that's what we're watching as the audience. That's good. That works.
The third one is when it goes off the deep end, where someone's running around with a VHS recorder, and it's like, come on, nobody. And that was my comment on The Long Road to Ruin. Nobody does that. No one is doing, especially when things go off the rails at the end. You drop your camera and you run like hell. You're not like. I mean, and if you're going to do that, and the one thing I liked about this, the one thing, at least the premise of it, they were shooting a movie. They were trying to shoot, she got snookered. I'll let you do the plot synopsis in a second, but at least I thought the premise of this thing was at least somewhat sound. She got snookered into doing a documentary about what she thought was going to be her adoptive home, or her birth home, because she's adopted.
Yeah.
And so she gets a film crew together and they go shoot a documentary in this, what is perceived to be an Amish settlement, thinking that this is going to be about, how she was given up for adoption and what her family is like and the lifestyles of the Amish and famous and all of that. And then everything goes off the rails. The problem is that you can only go so far with that, because as you were saying, especially in this movie, once the monster is burning and doing the neutron dance, we're fucking done. You're not like running backwards like, the monster's chasing me, and you've got the camera out. Like that's just not going to happen. I mean, and so that's where this stretches credulity.
I was willing to go along with the. I can go along with the internal.
Had they been wearing GoPros, that would have. Had they only done this with GoPros at the end, that would have solved that problem.
Yeah,
because you're maybe not thinking, let me rip this thing off my head and run for it. How heavy is a GoPro?
100%. They needed a scene where the problem is that, and I understand this is a filmmaking problem.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need that much shaky cam, and then whoever's running is never going to have the stuff in focus that you want to be in focus most of the time. So I understand the hurdles, But logically, I would go with there's a scene where she's lowered down to like a mine shaft.
Right.
And
right.
all
hang
the...
on. Do you want address your point then? But then we really got to get into the plot.
Yeah.
At this point, we're just talking about the movie.
And I will, but my point there is her camera for this is a GoPro that's attached to her head. Like
right.
She's got and at which point we're cool. Like I don't need any, like, okay, so something scares her where a normal person would drop a handheld camera here because I'm dangling 80 feet down or however far into a mine shaft by a rope and something's down here with me. Yeah, you're not going to be concerned with the composition of your shot. You're going to drop the camera and run for your life. Right. Here, because it's physically attached to her, it makes a bit more sense.
Let me posit this. I know the Blair Witch Project, and I think the other one, Cloverfield, I think it was.
Cloverfield is one. Yeah, Cloverfield. I never saw Blair Witch. I did not see the Blair Witch Project in theaters.
Mm-hmm.
So I never had the experience of that being a problem for me on the big screen. I did see Cloverfield in theaters, and a friend of mine, it did make sick. They also turned off the air conditioning because we went to like a midnight showing.
Mm-hmm.
So the air conditioning's off in a theater that's 80% capacity, give or take. Like it was fairly well attended.
Right.
And you've got the shaky, and you got the strobe light. Like you're asking for problems.
Here's what I'll tell you. I think the movie would have been served by biting the bullet and going the Blair Witch route, where stuff is out of focus. Because there's one shot of this movie that it's probably the best shot in the whole thing. It's also stupid hilarious to me, but the
one in the barn,
the one when you finally see the monster.
There's a few of those, but okay,
when there's a very clear shot of the demon.
Okay.
That's chasing them, and it's kind of doing one of these like, and it's the very first what's supposed to be the holy poop. I'm trying to watch my language tonight.
Yeah,
very much the holy poop moment of the whole movie, because you're really for the first time seeing the thing that they've been feeding this whole time. So anyway, the point being, it's a very clear, very vivid, very colorful shot, and it's meant to be so. But my point being that I think the movie is almost better served by, especially the way this one ends, if it had all been GoPro and out of focus and shaky and just nothing except that one shot was coherent, because it might have added to what is ultimately it might have provided the one scare in the movie, the one feeling of dread from the audience in an otherwise not particularly scary movie. I think the thing that works with Blair Witch, this is the point that I'm trying to make. The thing that works for Blair Witch is because you had so much of running through the woods with your camera and shaky cam and all of that. It provided, like, there were people feeling claustrophobic and frightened, and like you're just sitting in a movie theater, but you're so engrossed by the experience, as people have reported about that you forget that that's happening, and you're having an organic fright, which I think this movie went for and tripped and fell on its face.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
All right, let's do this. Go ahead and do your thing.
All right, so the plot of this movie goes a little bit as follows. We're introduced to our main character, Margot. Name escaped me for a minute there. And she has been contacted. She's been given up for adoption. She was given up for adoption as a child. And we're introduced to her as she and a friend of hers are starting to film a documentary because she has found someone that she's biologically related to, and she wants to get to know the people who are her blood. She found this. This story here that she's fed is a lie to try and reach out to her. We'll find out why in a minute. But at the time, the story that she's told is her cousin of some variety, someone she's related to, is Amish and has left the Amish community. But he got suckered into doing one of the 23andMe tests. Any number of these, send us some of your DNA and we'll put it in a loosely secured vault somewhere. Not at all potentially opening up all kinds of legal hazards down the line. My issues with those types of services notwithstanding. And so he kind of got suckered into this when he was on his Rumspringa, and she had taken one of those more recently, and they found each other, and she now wants to go figure out where she's from, what her biological relatives are like, and she and her friend, and they pick up a sound guy. They all head out to Amish country, where they meet this family, the group of people whose last name escapes me at the moment, but it doesn't really matter. I should know that actually. Hang on.
Let me tell you how there's no plot synopsis in the Wikipedia page.
Hang on, Baylor.
Okay. I just find that really funny.
It's true. No one's put one up. I'm going with Baylor.
Okay.
They go to their farm. They present as a fairly traditional Amish group of people. First attempt to make contact is rebuffed because we don't deal with the English here. And your cars and your cameras and your doodads and any of that nonsense. Somehow one of the children apparently walks 20 miles to provide us with a jump scare through a bathroom window at the hotel. Most nonsensical thing in this movie, and that's saying a lot. They return him. This earns them the goodwill of the patriarch of this group. So they go in, they start staying here, they start filming, they do the usual attempt to build dread. If you've seen any folk horror, all of this is very, very familiar. Most notably, there is a church some ways off in the woods that they're told, please don't go in there with your cameras. We find it mildly offensive. We're barely tolerating the existence of technology here as it currently stands. But also, as with most folk horror, things get a little bit more claustrophobic. Things aren't quite what they seem. Stuff is a little bit out of place. They explore more. They discover that in this church, there is a big hole in the ground under the pulpit, and it leads down, again, quite a ways, about 100 feet or so. There's never a specific measurement given, but it's far enough that light doesn't really keep traveling. If you're at the bottom with shooting a flashlight up towards the top, you can't see the exit. So a fair ways down. There's some creature being held down there. At some point, they witness a two-headed goat being born and then killed and dumped down there. Around this time, they also figure out that these people aren't actually Amish. They exist in the area of the Amish community, and they seem to adhere to a lot of the same tenets and a lot of the same aesthetic, but they are not Amish. So our group of plucky protagonists do the intelligent thing and try to leave. I really do want to give them credit for this. The number of times in these kinds of stories you find these people that just go, oh, all of this is screwed. But you know what? How about another week?
Yeah, we need to figure some things out.
Like, these people immediately go, you know what? Let's not. Now, it still doesn't work out, but I want to give them credit for not being idiots. Margot gets briefly abducted at one point by supernatural forces and drugged / possessed. This was horribly explained. What we all come to understand eventually is these people believe themselves to be the keepers of the demon Asmodeus. They have discovered a way to restrain him by forcing him to possess one person who is appropriately strong enough, and then you add in some magical wards, a bunch of salt, which is a barrier, and we can keep Asmodeus confined into the body of one person, and he will not then wreak havoc on humanity. And this is all a good thing. And Margot's mother was set to be one of his vessels, as was Margot. Her mother just said, you're not doing this to my kid, and dumped her at a hospital. Margot has now been lured back because it's more than enough time for Asmodeus to need to be transferred. So they take Margot down into the cave system below the church, start the transfer process, but again, our plucky heroes have to show up and mess things up. At which point, it becomes very, very clear that these people are not insane. They actually do this. And here's Margot's mother that is possessed by Asmodeus. and they break the barriers, so she gets free. She chases them into the little village. All hell breaks loose, pretty much literally, because this is what Asmodeus does. Their sound guy is violently murdered in glorious Zack Snyder slow motion. I will yell about that in a second. They get chased around. They eventually do escape. So our heroes leave. Our closing segment is a couple of police officers showing up at the burning compound. And the demon Asmodeus, better known as Toby, because we just have to connect things, has now possessed, what was his name? Samuel, the original guy who they found. And he murders the two police officers, hops into the cop car, and takes off down the road to commit more mischief. And this is where we end. And this is where this franchise should end. And this is where my journey towards alcoholism almost began.
Yeah,
Oof. This movie sucks.
I'm going to do a compliment sandwich.
You can't find two things. Do an insult sandwich with a compliment in the middle. That's about all you can do.
All right, that's fair. An insult sandwich. This is not a very interesting movie.
Nope.
It's very bland. Its color palette is very dull. I think they had a nice idea of doing this.
I will give them mild credit for the dull color palette, only because they came up with a plausible reason. If these people are trying to present as Amish,
right?
Okay, I'll like if your budget is so low that you can't afford the color red, and you have to come up with some reason for the dull color palette. He doesn't do the. I'm not trying to bash Zack Snyder, I swear. We don't do the Snyder thing where everything sepia tones for no reason.
Right.
It's the Amish in Amish country in midwinter.
Right.
Okay,
no.
Things are going to be gray.
Right. And I give them credit for, they chose a setting and an aesthetic and they went for it. But there are some people who might want to watch gray for an hour and a half. I don't. I would. Visually speaking, aesthetically, I was bored out of my mind.
Yeah, I'll completely agree with that.
These are not interesting or fun characters. Again, I go back to the Blair Witch Project, where as they started to descend into madness, it's fun to see some of the interplay, and there's some really great memorable lines. When the guy tears up the map, it's like, what? Why would you tear up the map? None of that in this movie. This is, like. The boyfriend, not a boyfriend, is as dull as can be. Margot, who I think is our heroine in this, she's like, I wonder where I came from. Amish people seem interesting. And then it's like, all right, that's all there is to her. Like, I remember thinking about this with the first Paranormal Activity movie, as much as I think Katie's kind of a bitch and the way that she treats the boyfriend is not great, to the point where I think I said on that podcast, I was kind of like, good, I'm glad you got possessed, you whore. But she was at least an interesting character, and she had some definitive qualities about her that produced any kind of emotion in me.
I also say, at least somewhat in defense of Katie, the little bits that we do see of her before things go nuts, she seems like a normal person.
Yeah. I think I talked about this during Long Road to Ruin, how much I liked the second one, because that family was likable.
Yeah.
And I did 100%. Not want to see them molested by a demon.
And
yet. And lobster. But that's the problem here, is I don't care what happens to any of these people.
The character writing here is a real, like, the closest we get to someone we loosely care about is the sound guy. And that's purely the force of the actor doing things that make you care and take notice of him. He makes bad jokes. Yeah. He's a bit of a card.
Yeah, I like the bit with him on the horse is really funny.
Can I just say very briefly about that? We need to distract this guy so we can get into the church. Okay, so he can give somebody riding lessons, and this can go a little bit sideways. And then they spend 40 minutes. Like, how long was that horse out of control for?
Like, he rode into town with Tonto.
And back.
In the Lone Ranger.
That was the. I don't hate the bones of the plan. I really don't. Like, that's solid. But then these people have no urgency about what they're doing. Like if that sequence goes, they get into the church, they move the pulpit, they find the hole, they see the contraption, and we're left this kind of eerie, like, okay, what's going on here? This is wonky.
Right.
But we don't have time to really explore this. Our lerpy friend over there is still trying to keep this guy from figuring out what's going on. We don't have time to do anything else. We're left with this sense of dread.
Yeah.
Like we know something's very, very wrong here. I think that works better instead of, okay, this horse just, went on the Odyssey.
Made a left turn at Albuquerque. So anyway,
decided to read from Ulysses.
So between dull on top of dull on top of dull, it was, I jokingly said to you, I think at one point I just kind of gave up on the movie, started watching porn on my phone, and would occasionally look up if I heard someone scream.
And you do realize you've now hurt the monetization process yet again.
I said corn in the rain.
Look, you can just call it adult material. Like, find a euphemism.
I was looking at nudie books.
Here, we'll just use euphemism. You were watching the euphemism.
That's right. I was watching the euphemism instead of watching the movie. That's how bored this made me.
It's a really uninteresting film. It just is.
So now the meat of my sandwich that I'm building. The one thing about this, I honestly thought the end sequence, as stupid as it is, was the most entertaining thing about this film, and absolutely worth the watch. Like,
I will go with you to an extent on that. I think there's a limit to that they cross, but the chase through the field and the blizzard, and then we turn around and we see the sound guy get killed. I take issue with the slow-mo, but that setup is good. The creature chasing them is suitably. Right. It evokes a response.
Well, it kind of reminded me of like the Weird Al Yankovic parody of "Smells Like Teen Spirit," like the video where
which is so much better than the original,
where the camera just pulls back and there's a guy running on fire this way and a guy doing a beach ball that way, and
when we get to the compound and there's people chasing each other with sharp implements and somebody running around without his eyes, somebody on fire.
Right.
Again, literally hell is broken loose at this point. That's great.
Yeah. Have you ever gone to like a cornfield or a haunted house around Halloween with friends? It's that kind of feel. It's just like you're in this very enclosed area that you paid money to go into. And while you're in this 40 by 40 square, we're going to throw all the horror at you, so that you get your $8 worth. And then when it's over, you're like, wow, I got my $8 worth of horror. Everything on earth was running back and forth, hot, wet, and on fire. It was great.
Yeah, I think
it was utterly overstimulating and overwhelming.
I think the problem this movie runs into in that sequence, I think it goes a bit too long. Not that sequence. It goes from this brief glimpse into the utter insanity,
the apocalypse, like that entire civilization. We watched that that civilization is a microcosm of a greater civilization, and we watched it crumble in real time. It was fantastic.
Yeah, we go from that to them being chased through the barn,
right?
Which is a sequence that goes on too long.
Yeah,
it has one good bit in it. When they think they've escaped and the guy with the camera is looking over Margot's shoulder, and then we see in the background the thing start coming at them again.
And it goes oogity boogity.
That just goes on way too long. I like the idea that they get to the van and they don't have the keys, because of course they don't have the keys. Why would they? The other guy had them.
Right.
So they have to go get I don't hate that as a way to avoid the standard stupid convenience of the keys are there. Of course they are.
Right.
Like, there's reality. If you're the one with the keys to the vehicle and you died back there, guess what we've got to do?
Right.
But unfortunately, it just drags everything down a bit, because they go get the keys, they come back, and we repeat the same spots.
What's weird is that this movie is 98 minutes, and so you and I are talking about like sequences that are too long. But I can honestly say, like, in the editing, like, I'm sure somebody came to that conclusion. We can't be the two smartest men on earth when it comes to film. And somebody else went, if you cut any more of this movie, you don't have a 90-minute feature anymore.
I understand some of the problems that this. Mm-hmm. If you choose to shoot this script, this is the problem you're going to face, and I don't know the best way to deal with it. Again, we're pointing at the problem. I think ultimately with this film is that the foundation, the writing, is so shaky that everything else has nothing to stand on.
So my second problem, my other slice of bread in this sandwich that I'm building, is your heroes are actually the villains, which I don't love.
I think.
Well, let me explain that for people who don't get it, and then you can debate me on the point. These people, Amish or otherwise, are trying to hold a demon and don't have the luxury of the Ghostbusters containment unit. They're doing what they can. They're sacrificing a girl every couple of years, or however long the time it takes for Asmodeus to get free, so that they can keep this. Like, they don't know how else to deal with it. They're a closed off society, and this is the best thing that they can do. And yes, killing a human being is wrong. See last night's protracted discussion of murder and prostitution on Last Night in Soho.
Murder is worse than solicitation. I don't understand why this is. Look, if you want to discuss the not moral relativism, if you want to debate whether murder or sexual assault is worse, okay, that I think is something that we can discuss. I think those are closer. Those are closer equivalents.
I just wanted to plug last night's podcast,
which you should listen to.
But yes, the argument can be made, but they were murdering people. Okay, greater good though. It's, should we drop the bomb on a civilian city in Japan in order to end the war, or should we continue to fight fighter to fighter and soldier to soldier, and maybe possibly lose this thing, or definitely lose an entire generation of men over the course of God only knows how long it's going to take to conquer Japan?
To say nothing of, like, and again, you're bringing up a horrible question, and I don't mean like that it's a bad question. I mean, there is no good answer to that question.
It's a moral quandary, and that's why, that's my problem with this film. You introduced a moral quandary, did nothing with it, didn't even explore it, just said that it is, and then your people that you're supposed to cheer and hope don't get eaten by the monster upset the whole thing and cause even worse problems. At the end of the day, they made it all worse and got many more people killed than if they had just let the one person get killed. And that is ultimately my biggest problem with this movie, is there doesn't seem to be any forethought into what it is, into the story that they're telling. It was just, we want to do, we want to reset this franchise. We want to do a thing where we're keeping a demon in a basement. We need a reason to keep the demon in the basement, and we need to somehow connect it to our protagonist. And then no other thought was put into this thing. And it's like, I'm watching this, I'm like, the real villains of this thing are these idiots that came to shoot this documentary, who upset this entire culture, let a demon loose, and got a whole bunch of people killed. Why am I watching this? Why should I care? Doesn't anyone think about what they're writing here? What is the point of all of this?
Now I'm going to debate you in a macro sense, not in a micro sense here.
Okay.
That I find that setup can be done well.
Sure.
If you want a specific example, Cabin in the Woods.
I haven't seen it, but I believe you.
Well, allow me to very briefly go through Cabin in the Woods, and if you do, I think you'll enjoy it if you do choose to watch it. The entire premise of Cabin in the Woods is that horror movies and horror stories are real, and they are once every so often, I forget the exact time frame, every culture has a series of potential horror tropes that they have to play into. Okay. Doing so keeps these, and so the question becomes why? Why is there this big underground organization across the entire world that every year, every 2 years, again, whatever it is, gets a group of people, and in tradition, keeping in tradition with what are understood to be horror storytelling tropes, has these people violently killed by whatever they happen to choose. And the answer, it turns out, is doing so prevents the literal end of the world, because there are the elder gods that live under the surface of the world and are kept at bay by these ritual sacrifices. And the movie ends with the protagonist deciding not to kill the last remaining person. She could have survived. The final girl can or cannot survive, depending on, that's not necessary. But she has to kill her best friend, who, because everyone else has to die in order to stop the apocalypse. And she decides, you know what, if we can't find a better solution, maybe we all deserve to die, and lets the end of the world happen.
Okay, interesting.
And again, so the point there is, you can make this kind of twist work. You just need to do it in a radically different way. And the entire setup for this movie, and especially the entire decision to go with found footage, is going to radically limit your ability to deal with this, because there's no way to organically discuss these things.
I want to talk about one last thing, and then you can say what you need to say, and we'll be done with this. It felt like it kept changing, and I don't know if this is the right term for this, but like aspect ratio. I felt like we were switching cameras constantly, and then I think there were some shots that weren't that weren't a natural camera. It was the fourth wall showing you what was happening in a traditional movie sense. And I was like, could we make up our minds what we're doing here? What is your framework? That was driving me nuts. It was like they forgot that this was a found footage movie at times. And it was like, can we take the bones of this, go back and just make a horror movie and leave the found footage stuff out of it? Because here's the thing. I feel like we fall into these traps in filmmaking. We're the ones doing it. They fall into these traps in filmmaking. We're making a found footage movie. Okay, well, it all has to be found footage then. Like, why can't you just make a movie where occasionally someone's point of view is through a camera?
There's another movie that starts out found footage, but it actually does end in the traditional movie format. It's a wonderful movie called Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon. The original, like the first 2/3, more than that, I think, of that movie is deliberately shot like documentary style, because the hook there is a journalist is contacted by a guy who says, I'm going to be the next Freddy Krueger. In this world, Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, these are real people. And the course of the movie reveals that it's a little bit like pro wrestling, not in the sense that it's faked, but the guy says, my name is Leslie Vernon. Here's my backstory. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go on a murderous rampage, and I've got all these gimmicks associated with it. We're going to do it at this apple orchard for this reason. And then you come to find out, again, these people are real. So if Freddy Krueger's real, how's he killing people in their dreams? Well, he's got a way to do it. A magician never reveals their secrets, but he has a way to do it. He's a real person. It's ditto Michael and Jason and everybody else. And wait, so your backstory's not real? Shut up. Yeah, backstories are fake, but what of it? Yeah, my name's not Roman Reigns. My name's Joe, and I've got leukemia. And it plays wonderfully with that. It's a genuinely wonderful little film. But the finale, the climax, they abandon found footage and just shoot the end like it's a slasher movie.
I feel like wasn't it the one where the kids get the superhero powers?
Trank did that.
Yeah.
The heck is that thing called?
You know what I'm talking about?
Chronicle.
Well, didn't that start out like found footage and then it becomes a real movie?
I haven't seen it. I know it starts found footage. I don't know about. I think there is a bit of it that is not found footage.
There came a point where I think starting out as your introduction to these characters needed to be, them shooting the movie. But then I think you needed to take a step back from the camera and just do a horror movie and not be locked into, it's like, we're going to do another Paranormal Activity movie. Well, it has to be all found footage. And then there's these cockamamie ways of getting around it. And then it's like, okay, but they were legitimate opportunities to produce good scares here had they only had the wherewithal to abandon the gimmick they started with.
Yeah, I think part of the you keyed into what was going to be my last major gripe about this thing. It tries to keep its cake and eat it.
Yeah.
it wants to be found footage because apparently that's what it means to be a Paranormal Activity movie.
Right. Like, it can't just be a ghost movie.
And it tries to get around the fact that it wants to do other things with, well, this is a professional film crew.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got good cameras and they've got drones. So we have overhead shots, and we'll have a guy say he actually shot B-reel footage that we can then insert into the movie. And he'll have the super slow-mo camera so we can do some shots with that. And then, yeah, like right at the end when Margot confronts her mother, we just go to a normal fourth wall perspective for like that couple of shots before they knock her down into the hay baler.
Right.
It's weird and it doesn't make sense.
Right.
And, like, found footage is it's a really tricky storytelling device.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to do it, you have to commit to it with all of its flaws. And it's what made the first two, I think, in this franchise work so well.
Right.
Because they just accepted stuff's going to happen off camera. And we have to be okay with that. And
I think in many ways, that's what the unseen terror is what was producing the most scares. It was, you hearing, in the background, and you're going, well, who's being knocked down a flight of stairs? And then you turn and it was boogity boogity, like that sort of thing. But I think like the creating the tension in the audience came from stuff happening off screen, not the oogity boogity that was running at you on camera. By the way, every time Katie runs at the camera like the Flash, I'm like, for one, I do this, but but also I'm just like, like we can't do one of these without her running at the camera. She has to have that run at the camera moment.
Yeah, Hogan must pose and Katie must sprint.
Yes.
This is not a good film. I don't really have a whole lot positive to say about it.
Paramount is just trying so hard and swinging for the fences, and have they had legitimately something that would appeal to a big enough audience for you to want to commit to Paramount Plus? Like, maybe if you've got kids in the Paw Patrol movie, but you could have also just seen that in the theaters if you really wanted to.
I genuinely don't. Look, I think Paramount Plus is in a better position than Peacock. And I don't say that just to dig at Peacock, which I can do because it amuses me to do so. But Paramount Plus has some material that I think has a fan base. It has a lot of the Star Trek stuff that's over there. Like there's stuff there that is potentially interesting to consumers. What's on Peacock apart from the WWE?
Yeah, there's a Dan Brown series that some people at work and I were talking about. But yeah, that's not a reason to get it. That's if you have it, you watch it.
Yeah, like I think the only selling point for Peacock is professional wrestling content.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, that was a major deal. I don't want to get too much off on a side tangent with this, but like Peacock really had nothing, and then it had the WWE, and that was the only reason people paid attention to it. Like they thought things like the Saved by the Bell reboot and Punky Brewster and all that.
Nope.
Because it's like, yes, there is a nostalgia culture, but the nostalgia culture is also very passive. We will consume things that are easily accessible. If you actually have to make people work for it, they're not going to do it.
Let me ask you a very serious question related to this, because you've covered the show that I'm going to reference.
Yeah.
If Fuller House is on Paramount instead of Netflix, anybody give a crap?
No. First of all, there are things that I might have wanted to talk about on Peacock and Paramount Plus, but nobody has it. So we don't talk about those things.
Yeah, there's... I think you and David at some point are going to talk about Lower Decks, which I... Hang on. I only bring that up because I think Lower Decks is your kind of humor.
Everyone told me Lower Decks is better than I think it is, and and it has a good internet. It has a good internet. What do you call it?
Buzz, fan base.
Yeah, something like that.
Reputation.
That's what I was looking for. It has a good internet reputation, so we're gonna get it on there eventually. I gotta get through you first and 9 other things before I can get to Lower Decks. But it also has Picard. It has Strange New Worlds coming up. There are people who clearly watch Discovery because they're going into season 4.
I'm not convinced of that, but I think they're just trying to keep Star Trek content out there, and I don't know anyone that let me put it like this about Discovery.
I tried to get Jonas to watch Star Trek Prodigy, which is their Nickelodeon Star Trek show. He made it 5 minutes and came back in the room and was like, I'm done with this. Done.
Yeah, I genuinely think Discovery is something they keep going just to keep it going. I doubt there's enough return on investment in terms of pure finances to justify it, but
we joked last night that this show was going to be like the shortest show we've ever done, and
it's on track.
We're almost at an hour, and we're still talking about the features. So I'm going to shut up now and let you wrap up your point.
I'm with you in that I think this movie would have been better served to just be a horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. You can still use the found footage in parts.
Sure.
Like using it as a clue that something tense is about to happen. Like you do. Like you use it for when they're asleep.
Mm-hmm.
Like anything during the nighttime, you do found footage. Anything during the day, you're a traditional movie.
Yeah.
Like you can still do this and have it work in that particular respect. I don't hate the setup for this thing. You know, Atavasm's an interesting way to go about horror. And, you know, going into doing the folk horror setup as well. Folk horror is a real thing and it works sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. But, you know, c'est la vie. Everything is like that. You could have made something interesting. And I mean, I also think that there could have been some of that third act spectacle of the destruction of this little community that if you do it in a traditional setup instead of found footage might even have been more terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, a lot of missed opportunities here. This feels like they're just trying to keep the machinery turning over. And now that they're releasing these on Paramount Plus, I doubt they're going to get this kind of return on investment they need financially.
Mm-hmm.
There's only two ways to continue going forward with this franchise if you wish to do so. One, plot out a bunch of movies, and I mean plot, get a writing team together and write them out so we're not doing the slapdash movie to movie.
Right.
Two, abandon any hope of connecting these things together and have them only be connected by theme and a little bit still using the found footage gimmick, not exclusively necessarily, but having it be present.
Do what they were going to do with Halloween's, you know, starting with season of the
original plan. Yeah, have these be in the loosest sense take place in the same universe, but have no connectivity.
Right.
I think that's the only way you can potentially save it at this point.
I mean, I don't literally mean Scooby-Doo, but literally like do like a Ghost Hunters kind of a thing. So they're running around with like pro camera footage. Like they're actually poking at the ghost. Like, you know, like, oh, we're in this haunted house. Ooh, oh shit, it's for real. You know?
Yeah. I'm with you. I want one of these in a prison or a mental facility.
Right.
Like there's ways to still go about this, but you can't keep doing what you've been doing to this point because no one cares anymore. You know, found footage it's a storytelling device. Consequently, it will go in and out of vogue. It's fallen out now. You need something else. You can you can still sprinkle it in, but you can't lean on it like this.
Here's the last thing I think we should briefly, like 50 words or less, talk about. The thing that also works with found footage is the getting your audience to suspend their disbelief enough that this could conceivably have been real.
Like that was one of the things about the original.
Right, the original and Blair Witch Project both shared that commonality in that it had convinced some people that this was actual found footage. That's where the term comes from.
Yeah,
and they need to kind of go back to that.
The original, the two lead actors from the first Paranormal Activity, like occasionally would get recognized on the streets after they filmed, like, "Oh, you're still alive."
And then this lady playing Katie just chasing people through a Walmart parking lot.
You know what? I hope she did at some point. just once or twice. Like somebody recognizes her across from a parking lot, and she just goes into the.
Like,
I mean, awesome. Look, I would. I'm not gonna lie. If I'm ever in that position, I would terrify small children and chase them. It would amuse me to no end.
So as we were saying, we did do the first 4 Paranormal Activity. So to tell you a little bit how the sausage is made here, real quick, as we transition to the next segment. about the end of spring, beginning of summer. Actually, the middle of spring, so we were talking about we were as a group of podcasters talking about all the old Blog Talk Radio, Radulich, and Broadcasting Network shows, and there was a lot of talk about like we have so much content. There are so many things that are like trending on Twitter at any given time. Wouldn't it be nice to have had all those old shows that we can use, to try to get people to find the network by attaching them to Twitter trends and stuff like that. And I said, yeah, we have such a large archive, but I don't have access to it anymore. I can't, like, if you go to my Blog Talk Radio account, which had been shut down for a few years now, all that stuff is dead content. I can't get any of the players to play. And they were like, well, maybe you should. And I'm like, I don't know how. So I ended up contacting Blog Talk Radio, and they were like, yeah, you got to restart your account, and then we'll give you back all the data. And I went, oh, so I did. And since then, starting, I think, late May, early June, we have been re-airing tons of old stuff. In that was the series of, was the Long Road to Ruin franchise review series that Sean and I did. And we had Pat on, and we had Robert on for a bunch of these. Gavin was on for a bunch. Ben was in there here and there. And we did it for a couple of years before we gave up on it for a while and started to do other stuff. In any case, one of the early ones, because Sean was like, you got to watch more horror. Let's find horror that isn't gross. And I went, okay, sure. He was like, hey, ghost movie. And I'm like, all right. Like, I bet you're going to really like Paranormal Activity. And I did. Like I said, the first two, I enjoyed talking about all four movies and going back and re-listening to them. I really enjoyed the discussions. But the first two movies I legitimately enjoyed watching. The first one still gives me the creeps. The second one doesn't creep me out as much. Dude, that first one still like unnerves me.
That remains, I think, one of the most effectively scary movies I've ever seen, in the sense that
shot for $1.50.
Yeah, shot for nothing. But in the sense that if the mark of a genuinely scary movie is that it scares you after you leave the theater, that is like tops.
I watched that on a night that my wife and kids were either like not spending the night somewhere else or just out late, and I was home alone. And by the time it was over, I was like, oh!
I watched
sleeping with the lights on.
I watched that in the theater. I paid to go see it, and that night, like, I know my way around my house in the dark, right? Like I've gone around it enough at this point that I could do it blindfolded and not run into things. Anytime I got up, like, okay, lights, the lights.
Yeah, I think when I went to bed that night, I had
that tree outside my window that tree outside the house that gets blown and occasionally rattles against the wall. Like, the next day, I went out with a bow saw, and okay, we are trimming this.
So Sean has remarked that in the early years of the Long Road to Ruin, listen, this is not, we're not doing PBS here. Both of us can kind of amp it up and be a little pro wrestler on this, and I still continue to be that way. Robert has watched me go into any number of conniptions on on a podcast to do it for laughs. Am I doing a character?
Feel free to listen to our review from last night in Soho for another example of this.
And am I doing a character? No, I'm still me. I'm just kind of turning it up because I want people to laugh and be entertained and enjoy our discussions. Sean has over the years kind of reflected back on that and said probably could have done some of those better, a little less kitschy, a little less sticky, and a little bit more serious. And so I gave him, he couldn't be on the show to review Paranormal Activity Next of Kin tonight, but I wanted to give him the opportunity because we talked about redoing some of the old Long Road to Ruins. Like, we're going to do Spider-Man at the end of the year, but we're going to do it differently. He has talked about, like, high on his list of redos is Paranormal Activity. So without further ado, I gave him an entire segment, a pre-taped segment that we're going to go to momentarily, of his revisitation, sort of a mini Long Road to Ruin solo Sean show of the Paranormal Activity franchise, movies 1 through 4. I hope you enjoy it.
Time to wake the dead. Paranormal Activity is back, baby. After 15 years dormant on the sidelines, Paramount's one-time tentpole Halloween franchise has returned to theaters with Paranormal Activity Next of Kin. Now, Time will tell whether this ends up being I made an utter ass of myself, and I have long wanted another shot at doing these films justice. The thing is, I showed the first 2 movies their appropriate due, but when it came time to the third and fourth, I devolved into playing up exaggerated baby rage with all the enthusiasm of a horny howler monkey barking at the moon. As a result, I came across as an asshole, not a critic. No, they are not always the same thing. And unfortunately, in doing so, I robbed the movies of a thoughtful, intelligent examination. Then, about 6 months ago, I happened to go back and listen to the 6-part franchise retrospective by James A. Janice and Chelsea Rebecca on the Dead Meat podcast, which, by the way, is superb, and I 100% recommend that horror fans of all stripes go forth and check out their full body of work. They broke everything down so meticulously and so objectively that I couldn't resist going back and giving all half-dozen movies just ripping sequences in which Katie is yanked straight out of the bed by her ankle and screams as she's dragged down the hall. This is simple. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the actual occurrences feel believable. They feel plausible. But the scares don't even really take center stage. In fact, they're used more than anything else to continue to ratchet up the mounting tension, suspicion, and dissension between the couple that really becomes the centerpiece of the movie, leading right up to its violent climax in which a possessed Katie flings Mika down the hall and into his precious camera stationed at the foot of the bed. There are no real elaborate shots. Rather, Paranormal Activity largely focuses on helped by the fact that, for the most part, for about half the movie, the family doesn't really take any of the phenomena seriously. In fact, much of it is spent with them laughing, joking, and really barely finding anything to be amiss at all. Much like Mika in the first movie, the father is also guilty of incessantly gaslighting the women in his life, refusing to believe anything they say or even try to prove to him with shots from the camera. It's not quite as obnoxious and toxically macho as Mika, but it's still irritating nonetheless. It takes about half the movie for the scares to really find their footing. But I will say this, when they do, they are more violent, more aggressive, and more creative than in the first movie. Of course, owing to the fact that, like a good sequel, this one had a much beefed up budget. This continues pretty much up to the climax in which Hunter's father makes a bizarre deal with the entity to pretty much scuttle off and go and harass Christie's sister instead of Christie, thus bringing an end to Christie's possession. However, in the final scenes, we catch up after the events of the first movie and find Katie invading Christie's home and murdering Christie and her husband, absconding with Hunter, and leaving Allie to, according to the aftermath, find her parents upon returning from a school trip. Once more, we set up for another sequel. And once more, the sequel takes becoming more and more violent, much faster than in the previous movies. The scares are inventive, the shots are limited because we're not working with remote surveillance. From here, we pivot back to the present day and the Nelson family in Nevada, who, through some means that's never entirely explained, have managed to adopt baby Hunter from the first movie. They encounter and briefly take in a small neighborhood child roughly his age when his mother, as we later find out, the still very much possessed and still very evil and very not nice Katie is taken away to the hospital one night. Once the boy is taken in, Toby takes root. And, well, the scares are decent, but unfortunately they're overshadowed by flaws including dangling plot threads that are never resolved, a creepily over-sexualized teenage daughter, her sex pest pervert of a boyfriend, horrible, horrible, horrible parents whose sins include not only gaslighting, but drugging their daughter with sleeping pills, and an ongoing question of why are we even filming any of this time? There's no suspicion. There's no real curiosity. Everybody is just going about their business. But here's this teenage girl running around just shooting everything with, of all things, her laptop. We get a half-hearted rendition of the close of Paranormal Activity 3, complete with a bigger coven now setting up shop down the street. Once more, pretty much everybody is dead by this point, either by the coven's hand or simply Katie's. And we would move on through 2 more movies, the excellent Paranormal Activity, the marked ones, and the equally stupid Paranormal Activity, the Ghost Dimension. And that's it. Overall, not a half-bad batting average. We're talking about, let's see here, of all 6 movies, 3 excellent ones, 1 that was mediocre but still enjoyable, and 2 absolute embarrassments. Look, for proper perspective, consider the fact that in 8 movies, the Leprechaun franchise didn't produce 1 that could objectively be called good. Thank you for sticking around. I'm Sean. You're not. Thank you to Mark and Robert for enlisting me. Thank you to James and Chelsea for inspiring me to give Paranormal Activity another chance. And I really hope to hell Next of Kin is good. See you around.
All right. And that was brought to you by Grammarly.